What's up, guys? This is Ricky V, and today we have episode number 23, which is part 2 of the interview with Mr. Rick Collins. If you want to listen to the first part, go back to episode number 22. That is going to be part 1, episode number 23. This is part 2. Without further ado, Mr. Rick Collins. Let me just steer the conversation a little bit towards this, because you mentioned that is real interesting. There's been a surge in TRT clinics over the last decade, where they're just everywhere now. Now, I know a little bit about it, a little bit about how they're being franchised out now, how even some of the laws that changed around the pandemic, around COVID lockdowns, where you could have telemed, where you could see your doctor basically through Zoom. And some doctors could even get a special license into just on the next state over. So now if you have 15, 20 doctors around the country, and each of them get the licensing to do a telemed on adjacent states, you pretty much have a lockdown. And you can create a whole network of TRT clinics and prescriptions and stuff. This is what I've been kind of following, because it's really interesting to me how they all came out, and now they're all over Facebook. They're marketing to me on social. So you talk a little bit more about that. Is that going to continue to go on, or do you think that's going to also come to an end? Because I see them prescribing now stuff that I know has not been approved for human use yet. Some of these peptides are not approved, but they're prescribing them. And how's that work? And what are your thoughts on all that?
So, the TRT clinics have evolved over time. If you remember, probably 15 years ago, there were some efforts by law enforcement folks to try to crack down, and they were looking at some of them as kind of pill mills, the equivalent of like a pain pill mill, where you just call up, you speak to a sales rep, and next thing you know, you've got some DECA and tests showing up at your door. What makes TRT clinics or any prescriber or distributor, medical distributor of anabolic steroids into the harm's way area of criminal law is when it's for a non-medical purpose, right? There's nothing wrong with prescribing testosterone for a medical purpose, with a valid prescription for legitimate medical use. But it's not okay to prescribe it for non-medical purposes. And non-medical purposes include bodybuilding, or putting another inch on your chest or your arms, right? Or increasing your bench press. So anything that shows that that's what it's for is subjecting that clinic or that doctor to potential harm's way. And I think the clinics have changed a lot of their modus operandi and how they operate, to try to adhere to the medical side of things. So they are requiring blood tests. I don't know how you could prescribe testosterone to somebody without knowing what their levels are, right? So the first thing that they'll do is that they'll often have some type of video conference between the patient and the doctor. They'll look at factors that suggest that it might be for non-medical purposes. Is the person an athlete? Is the guy 21 years old? What sort of dosing? There were times where some of these clinics in the early stage were giving, 800 milligrams of test a week to a 23-year-old who was competing in sports, so that's how you get yourself jammed up, right? But certainly the science has evolved, and the science suggests, particularly for guys of a certain age, I don't know, 40, late 30s, late 40s, certainly 50s and 60s, that as your levels drop, and naturally, which is just that natural, hypogonadism, over time, that testosterone can be very beneficial for a whole lot of quality of life aspects. for those who have low levels, and that it's not the big threat to the heart, particularly at TRT doses, that some folks claimed it was, and that the FDA put a black box warning on testosterone saying it can cause strokes and heart attacks. That science doesn't really support that. And as you probably know, there's a bunch of class action lawsuits that have been filed against the makers of testosterone drugs, creams and stuff like that, claiming that, hey, you were false advertising and you were saying that this is good for people, but it's not, and it causes heart attacks, and my client had a heart attack and stuff like that. And the reality is, every month I see a new study coming out that supports that testosterone is actually good for your heart if you have low levels and you're of a certain age and you don't have any contraindications, that testosterone can actually improve cardiac health. And so it's interesting, I think, as that has happened more and more. And of course, the devil's in the details, right? The difference between a medicine and a poison is the dose. Taking 150 milligrams, 180 milligrams a week of testosterone might be good for somebody's heart. Taking 1,500 milligrams of test, deca, and trenbolone for long periods of time, that's not going to be good for your heart. So assuming that the TRT is done in a safe manner, and again, I'm not a doctor, but certainly what I read in the medical literature suggests that the risks that have been portrayed in the media and by these plaintiffs' class action lawyers are really not, they're baseless.
The TRT clinics, yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot. I remember there was a time where a clinic got raided and they pulled out the records, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was like 50 Cent and Mary J. Blige and a lot of actors and stuff were on their patients list, and all this crazy stuff was going on.
Yeah, some people.
That was but there were a lot of famous folks were swept up in that. And now fast forward to today, and now today, apparently, you can go to a TRT clinic with your testosterone levels through the roof and just tell your doctor, hey, I've been injecting this stuff underground. My level, I'm not going to inject it anymore. My levels are going to crash. Can you prescribe me something to give me a soft landing so I don't go into depression? And apparently, just how maybe a heroin addict can get a drug to help them not go into a withdrawal. Apparently, now some doctors of these TRT clinics are willing to work with you, and as long as subsequent blood tests show that your levels have dropped to a normal and you're not still abusing it, they'll prescribe you to come down, and you never have to really provide a low testosterone test. You just have to level with the doctor and say, yeah, my levels are crazy, but that's because I was injecting illegally. Now I just want to go through you. How much can you give me per week, and give me a soft land? And I mean, that whole game has changed a lot. Apparently, from what I've heard, the people behind it who are franchising all these clinics out, the guys who have the doctors' networks, they also have people up in Washington trying to help change some things to make it so that they can survive long term. Because I mean, dude, they're prescribing TV 500 to people. They're prescribing things that are now you can get Anavar, you can get a deca of Vandrolone through these clinics. I've even heard that they're going to be prescribing Dianabol soon again, which were all at some point approved for human use. But it's been pretty interesting how that's changed. And I was just wondering if you had some recent experience with TRT clinics and some of those things.
So who knows what the future is going to hold? It seems like things develop for a while, and then somebody in government or in a medical regulatory context will look at it. I have represented doctors in the past who've gotten jammed up for their practices in prescribing testosterone or other steroids to patients in a medical licensing situation, not even criminal. So obviously a doctor who is prescribing a lot of testosterone and other steroids can get on the radar screen in a number of different ways. Certainly, the type of advertising can put the person on the radar screen, or a complaint to the medical licensing folks from a family member or from a disgruntled patient. And then they start looking into it. And then ultimately they ask for the doctor's records. And then they see the doctor is prescribing testosterone and Anavar to, let's say, a woman who is a competitive bodybuilder or something, or to a 21-year-old who didn't have low levels. And suddenly, some of these medical licensing boards are comprised of very conservative folks, and so you'll have an endocrinologist sitting on the board and asking the doctor questions like, well, you're not an endocrinologist. You're a emergency care doctor. That's what your training is, or you're a dermatologist, or a plastic surgeon. What made you think that you would be able to practice endocrinology? And there's definitely a divide between the mindset of the doctors who are involved in these age management kind of clinics and the more traditional, orthodox, conservative endocrinology folks who are like, if your levels are not equivalent to a 90-year-old woman, then we can't give you a drop of test, and that's, unfortunately, that is somewhat of the mindset of the more conservative endocrinologists. So there's definitely a divide there. Whether at some point there's another one of those operations like the one that went after the clinic that you were talking about, or some other clinics in Florida over the years, it may be, as things get more and more and more aggressive, that somebody makes a complaint and that puts some clinic on the radar screen.
That's very interesting. Yeah, there are definitely a ton of them out now. And it's changed the game because they don't have to go get their own doctors. They plug into this network of doctors and they're done pretty much. They just have to go out and find patients. And it's a real interesting landscape. It'll be interesting to see if this comes to an end as well. Because you've been at this for 20 something years. I've been at it for about just under 20. And we've seen so many things come and go, man. Just so many different things come and go within this industry, within the I guess you could call it the enhancement industry.
Yep. But Rick, I love what I do. I am so happy. I was a competitive bodybuilder when I was young, and I was a personal trainer, and I'm certified strength and conditioning specialist through NSCA. So fitness and health and nutrition and training has been part of my life since long before I was a lawyer. And I love that I've been able to kind of, my practice is kind of where these two things meet, right? Where health and fitness and wellness and nutrition intersect with criminal and regulatory law. I've gotten to meet I've represented a lot of pro bodybuilders. I've gotten to spend a day in Arnold Schwarzenegger's office talking with him and meet him a number of times in my capacity involved with pro division of IFBB as counsel. I've had all sorts of fun stuff. And I love being able to help people who get jammed up. The criminal cases that I handle as a defense lawyer generally don't involve anybody hurting somebody else. I'm one of the few criminal defense lawyers in the world whose clients typically don't steal anything, don't hurt physically, they're not, or sexually, or even economically. They don't do those sorts of things. It's basically people who are involved in a community who are looking for a certain type of appearance and are using steroids or selling steroids within that kind of context. And many of my clients have no prior criminal history. They're law-abiding people. They're good people who get jammed up because of the way the laws are. And as you probably know, the U.S. laws on steroids are not necessarily the same as once you get out of the U.S. In the United Kingdom and in Canada,
different other places.
That's right. They don't treat it the same way. So, here we are much more militant and harsh on the way we deal with these, particularly in the context of possession. It's night and day. So, so I love what I do. I love helping people. I love that a lot of my clients on criminal cases, become my friends on social media, and will chime in and recommend me to other people, and they want to be part of my journey as things go forward, and I love that. I'm very blessed, Rick. I'm very lucky to have the practice I have, and certainly anybody who needs me, or who I can help in some way, if you're in the nutrition or the supplement industry, or if you're get jammed up by law enforcement. And we could do another show sometime, Rick, and talk more about people's rights and what to do if you're questioned by law enforcement, or if they show up with a warrant or they don't have a warrant and they're looking for consent in one context or another. There's so much information that we could give to people. But I really appreciate you giving me the time to chat today. It's been a lot of fun. You're very well versed, and you and I, have been watching this for a long time. And I love that you brought up Ben Johnson. I'll finish with this. That 1988 Seoul Olympics sports scandal where Ben Johnson beat Carl Lewis really launched, in many ways, the war on steroids by the U.S. Congress, and in some ways really launched my career in defending people who were accused of these crimes because of the law that went into effect because of Ben Johnson. And so I got the chance to meet Ben Johnson about 5 years ago. We were part of a panel together talking about doping in sports and steroids and stuff. And he and I were able to have a private conversation where, I acknowledged to him, I said, I owe my career in many ways, to the fallout that occurred from your doping scandal. And we took some pictures together, and I think that picture is somewhere on my Rick Collins ESQ Instagram page, as well as other stuff. So anybody who's interested, certainly you can follow me there. And if anybody ever has a question or a problem, I'm here to help.
Not to get too political, but it was Joe Biden that spearheaded the whole move to make steroids criminalized.
He was certainly part of it, and very vocal in the putting out the idea that steroids are un-American because they foster cheating, and of course the reality, and we could talk about this another time, but the reality is that the vast majority of people who are using anabolic steroids for non-medical purposes are not even competing in sports. It has nothing to do with sports. It has nothing to do with performance in a contest or competition. The vast majority of people, and the vast majority of
Yep.
people using steroids are just looking to appear more muscular than they would without them. That's it, and I've analogized this, and I'm sure you've read my pieces and heard me talk about that. I think for all of those people, steroids are much more akin to cosmetic surgery. It's the male, typically the male version of liposuction and breast implants. I mean, it's subjecting yourself to medical risks arguably for vanity. Okay, but we're a very vain culture. We do all sorts of stuff for vanity that's allowed. But I think the context is much more similar. And yet, while a lot of those things are perfectly legal to do, if a doctor does that, or you go to a doctor trying to do that, you're thrown out, or the doctor gets arrested. So it's an interesting discrepancy.
Yeah, the majority of steroid users are Bob, just going to the office every day doing an accountant, looking brolic, just looking huge.
I did it. I was part of a study on that. We did a survey a few years back. You may remember. I think it was published in the medical literature in 2007, called A League of Their Own, and you can go on. You can find it online by Googling, and the average steroid users in their early 30s using it for cosmetic purposes, not competing in sports, hasn't competed in sports in years and years and years, has above average education, has above average income, and it's purely for non-medical purposes, to look better.
Yeah, absolutely. Professional, just Bob going to office, professional, making good money. Yeah, that's
And
the
yet he's a
profile of the average
criminal.
store user.
And yet that Bob is a criminal under American law.
We need to get all the Bobs out of the woodwork. It won't take long. It'll be a couple of months to get, I will say this, Rick, I in my 20 years in this industry, I've sold advertising space. I've now made my own products, deal with manufacturers, deal with a lot of people. I think we have something like 300 friends on Facebook that we are in common. Sure. Everybody looks for Rick whenever they're jammed up with anything. All these nutritional supplement companies, there was just this guy I was just talking to about making a pre-workout for me. Back in the day, many years ago, he had done some pro hormone deals after the bans. And, years and years later, it caught up with him and he had to go and, deal with his past. And he mentioned having you as an advisor to his lawyer. So if people aren't hiring you directly, they're hiring you to work with their lawyers,
yes.
And advise them. It's definitely, I've yet to see anybody in the industry that gets jammed up that doesn't call you or have their lawyers call you, because you specialize in this thing. Now, let me ask you this last question before we go, and we could get into a podcast about this too. When you were going to law school, when you were thinking about becoming a lawyer, what did you actually want to specialize in? Because I doubt you were in law school thinking about defending steroid users, right? What were you thinking about doing with your life? When you grew up, what do you want to be?
It's it's so funny because when I went to law school, it was before steroids were criminalized. They weren't even controlled substances, so there was no even thought that could ever be an area of practice. And it was really before sports nutrition really took off. It was only in the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, and in the aftermath of that people started coming out with sports nutrition products. I remember when I was in college, there was sports nutrition didn't really exist. There was some desiccated liver tablets that we were taking, and this chalky, horrible protein products, or there was this collagen, this red syrupy collagen in a plastic bottle that you'd pour on a tablespoon and drink, and it tasted like something between motor oil and cough medicine. And so I had no idea, stories. Right, you remember it was a long time ago, but that's what it was. And so timing is everything, Rick. It's funny that the year that I went into private practice in 1990 was the same exact year that steroids were criminalized by Congress. And so maybe things happen for a reason. And so the timing was just perfect. When I went to law school, I was initially thinking about being a prosecutor. And so I did work for 5 years as a prosecutor. So I was putting the bad guys, and it was putting the bad guys in jail and fighting for justice, and putting away the robbers and the rapists and the people who are doing terrible things to other people. And I loved that job, and I think I did it in a way that was fair. I was tough but fair, and then I went into I left that to go into private practice because I'm entrepreneurial like you, and I wanted to build a business. I wanted to build something of my own with my partners, and I started out doing bread and butter criminal defense, and I still do some bread and butter criminal defense work at the federal level outside of this, this practice. For example, I'm representing one of the people who went into the U.S. Capitol on January 6th and defending, him on that case in Washington. So I do other cases as well, and I love being a criminal defense lawyer. But I, this sort of came about because I was, having been a competitive bodybuilder, having been in the gym culture for years, when steroids became criminalized, and suddenly in the early 90s, people started getting arrested for steroids. it was like, what the hell is going on here? And nobody really
They
knew.
made it harder for you to get your stash. They made it harder for you to get your stuff.
Oh, you're bad. You're a bad man. So, so yeah, so I started getting calls, and these were the same. These are the kind of guys that had been spotting me in the gym for years. You know, these are the same kind of guys who were my friends, and so so it was great, and my practice evolved naturally, you know, organically. It wasn't something that I planned. It wasn't something that, you know, was opportunistic or thought out. It was just, you know, sometimes, you know, fate finds you, and you find your place, and you find your purpose and your mission in life. You know, I was just talking to some law students the other day, and talking about, you know, a lot of young people are looking for happiness within the legal profession. And I say, you know, looking for happiness is not, you know, you're never going to find it. It becomes, you know, it's like chasing a ghost. You know, the closer you get to it, the more it evaporates. And, you know, instead of looking for happiness, search for purpose. Find your purpose. Find purpose in what you do, and happiness will follow finding that purpose.
I know there had to be a time where you defended those one or two really well-known key clients that kind of established you, settled you in as like the go-to guy. Because we, you know, our industry, it's in a way everybody kind of knows each other.
Right.
And I know there had to be a time where like you defended those one or two guys that are really well known, and after that, everybody started calling you. Is that how it kind of went about?
Yeah, I think that that kind of happened. You know, even guys who weren't overly well known started, you know, singing my praises to other people because of how I handled their cases and how I kind of understood things that other lawyers didn't. But yeah, I mean, I represented the chemist in the Balco case probably 20 years ago, and that got a lot of publicity. The whole, you know, cheating scandal with, you know, Marion Jones and Barry Bonds and all of that. So that put me on the radar screen, and I represented Dave Palumbo. You brought his name up before, but Dave also
Yep.
sing. I mean, Dave always says, if you don't hire Rick, you're out of your mind, and I appreciate that tremendously. And so, you know, I represented some people who were higher profile and who had, you know, some influence in the community. And so I think that definitely put me on the radar screen. And really, there's not a lot of other lawyers, if any, that really have the experience and knowledge of decades in the trenches. And so, yeah, I think, like you said, if you're in this business and you're involved with any kind of, you know, FDA or DEA problematic substances, you probably know who I am, or have me on speed dial.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, nobody wants to sit with their lawyers and have to explain to them what these steroids are I got in trouble with, right? Nobody
Right.
wants
Yeah.
to do
No.
that.
And I wind up
Like,
doing that. You know, when people hire me as a consultant, I wind up doing
yeah.
that. I wind up educating their lawyer from, you know, a very rudimentary level.
Yes, I could. That's why they either hire you directly or they bring you in to work with their lawyers, because I mean, some of these guys might be great criminal lawyers, but they don't know the difference between a, you know, a DECA and a D-ball and an Anavar. They don't know anything.
And that can be the most important thing, you know. And so I've handled cases in all over the country where people will bring me in as the lead lawyer, and then I'll bring in just a local guy who, you know, and I'm very, very careful about who I bring in as my local counsel, because I want somebody who is the right fit for the particular prosecutor involved and the particular judge that the case is going to be in front of. And so I can kind of very much handpick local counsel. I've worked with excellent local counsel around the country, but a lot of the heavy lifting I can do, because a lot of the negotiating involves the particular expertise that I have. And that benefits the client. And that combination I've found on cases from, you know, the deep South to the far West, and, you know, everywhere in between, is great. And I am licensed in numerous states as well. I'm, licensed not only in New York, but in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts and DC and Texas. But I found that particularly in very small jurisdictions, small cities, having local counsel that I bring in is a great way of getting sort of the combination of the knowledge and experience and the subject matter with a little bit of the home cooking, where the judge will see a face that she recognizes or he recognizes, and that combination gets the kind of results that then have people going out and spreading the word about me.
Yeah, I like reading a lot of your stuff that you put on social and some of your columns. I mean, I really like reading your stuff because it's always very interesting, because in this industry, you always see people, even people like I said, my buddy has a brand on the up and up, and some pro hormones he sold 4 or 5 years ago caught up with him. So you always see people jammed up that you consider just normally good people. And some of the better ones that I like reading when you write is it this whole steroid thing is so complex that even prosecutors don't understand it too well. And there's times that you've had to go and explain to the prosecutor what it is we're doing here and why maybe your case is not as strong as you think. It's always been interesting that even the prosecutors don't even understand it.
That's very often. And I've dealt with, I got to say, most of the prosecutors I've dealt with are smart people, and they're worthy adversaries. And I like look, it's, if you want to be a trial lawyer, you've got to be a gladiator. You've got to recognize that when you're a defense lawyer, you're stepping into an arena, and the government, for all the mechanisms of presumption of innocence and burden of proof on the prosecution, the reality is the government has great resources. They've got tremendous resources. They've got tremendous advantages, and you're the gunslinger. You're the guy who's coming in, guns a-blazing, to try to dig your client out of what could be just a deep, deep black hole. And I take it seriously. I say that the greatest compliment anybody can ever pay me is to trust me as their lawyer, to hire me as their lawyer, because that puts a huge burden on me. You're entrusting me to save your life very often, and so whether it's through negotiation and explaining to the prosecutor how certain presumptions that he or she has about the case are unfounded, or certain guideline views that they have are actually not correct. And I have enough experience to be able to articulate these things in a way that's persuasive. And, and if you have to fight and you have to litigate, which I have, I've litigated all sorts of weird issues and weird cases across the country. You got to be prepared to fight. But yeah, very often I'm able to work things out in a way that is very beneficial to the client. And I'm probably one of the few lawyers who can say that the majority of my clients don't go to prison, even on federal cases. And that's statistically very, very unusual, if not unprecedented. And obviously you can never make guarantees, and every case is different, and circumstances vary. But I can tell you that the majority of my clients are prosecuted in federal courts and don't go to prison, and I'm proud of that.
I think the fact you just understand every side of this so well puts you at a huge advantage. Like we were just discussing, it puts you just an incredible advantage of negotiating when you're the one explaining to the prosecutor what we're doing here, what we're talking about here, what these things are that we're talking about. And I think it's great, because otherwise you'd have two lawyers that don't even know what's going on, don't know what they're even looking at.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen sometimes, sadly, where people will call me and they'll tell me what happened with their case, and it's too late for me to help, and it's I'm like, well,
one of the reasons I know one of the reasons I know it's a mess out there is because, at least when we read some articles, even sometimes you share on social, where people are getting having to forfeit money for SARMs or this or that. The agencies that are coming after them are always different. Sometimes it's the FDA, sometimes it's the FBI, sometimes it's local. So the fact that it's so kind of widespread. Different agencies are
Sure.
enforcing it. Each different agencies are using different laws to go after these guys.
Yeah.
For
You could
it.
add Homeland Security. You can add
Yep.
Homeland Security to that. You can add the postal inspectors to that. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
The fact that it's not just one agency or two using the same laws, but basically several agencies using everything in the book to try to put these guys out of business. It definitely takes someone who really knows every end of it to really negotiate and get get you out of this jam with a decent result, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm humbled and I'm blessed to be able to help people in that way. I really love what I do. It gets back to, purpose leads to happiness, and I thank you for giving me the chance to chat a little bit. I hope anybody listening to this podcast got something of value out of it, and follow me on social media. And certainly you can reach out if you go to rickcollins.com. Rickcollins.com is a website that has some information about the sort of federal practice that I have. And if you're interested in supplements and sports nutrition issues, we do my firm represents a lot of companies. We even do trademark work. So if you're looking to, even contract or trademark work, I have lawyers that do an enormous amount of that work and can help supplement companies to navigate those waters. So yeah, maybe I'll see some of your listeners on social media, reach out, say hi. I go to a lot of the trade shows too, at least until COVID kind of derailed so much, but I usually go to the Olympia, I go to the Arnold, and some of the expos for supplements. So maybe say hello if you're there.
Yeah, Rick, thank you very much for coming on today. I'll definitely try to get another interview with you. I get into kratom. I want to get more into steroid laws and international things to do with steroids, and there's definitely a lot of other topics.
Absolutely. Growth hormone we could talk about, individual rights and how to protect them. So much we could talk about. So thank you again, Rick. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for your time today, Rick. I know you're a busy guy. I appreciate it, and we'll be in touch via social and try to get something going. I'm going to link your socials, basically your Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook on the description of this podcast so that people can go and join you and read.
Awesome.
You post in very interesting stuff. I like reading all of your work, man. It's incredible. Thank you very much for your time today, brother.
You're welcome, man. Thank you. Take care.